Subcommittee meeting to order. Clerk, can we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. And from the City of Fresno, Councilmember Arias.
Present.
And Councilmember Esparza.
Present.
And now from FUSD, Member Islas. Absent. Member Cazares. Absent. Member Rosas. I believe that is Elizabeth. Online, can you hear us, Member Rosas? You're on mute at the moment. Member Rosas, I do see you online, and you are on mute at the moment. Can I get a quick check that you're in and present? So I see you're unmuted now. No. Member Rosas, one more time.
I'm sorry, I was having trouble anyway. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now from SCCCD, Member Johnson.
Present.
Thank you. Member Gomez. Absent. From FCOE, Member Burton.
Present.
Thank you. Member Martinez. Absent. And CUSD, Member Singh. Absent. Member Kerfan. CUSD. Absent. And from Sanger, Member Vang.
Present.
Thank you very much. And just for, we do have a quorum. The School Liaison Subcommittee for the City of Fresno are made up of members Arias and Esparza, and they will be the one voting on the approval of the agenda. This is a joint meeting that the other bodies are joining us with, and that is how things will run today. The very few items that we are voting on will be voted on by the City of Fresno members. All right, and I'll throw it back up to you, Chair Esparza.
All right, thank you, Clerk. Actually, before I move on to the approval of the agenda, I do have Pledge of Allegiance agenda, so we can stand very briefly. If Trustee President Johnson, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, approval of the agenda. I'll motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second. Let the record show President Singh is also in attendance.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any opposition? Seeing none, the agenda is approved for today. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which occurred apparently September 23rd, 2019. Yeah, so just to give context for the benefit of the public, this School Liaison Subcommittee was created in 2015 by the City Council. It never held a meeting until I took office in 2019 and became the chairperson, at which point we had 2 meetings in 2019, in the spring and then again in the late summer, early fall. And then I think COVID took us all for a ride, and we have been dormant since, and now we're back. Hopefully as a more active body. But I'll be giving lots of grief to all the trustees who are absent today. So let the record show that. I motion to approve the minutes from September 23rd, 2019.
Second.
All right, any opposition? Seeing none, minutes are approved. We'll move on to member comments. So again, welcome to everyone. Especially want to thank the city staff for sticking around late this evening. I see, well, first is the face of the staff is the mayor. The city manager here are several directors from Parks and Public Works, assistant city manager, deputy mayor, our police chief. Thank you all for joining us this evening and participating as we navigate these issues around our city that impact our schools and vice versa. At this time, I'll sort of just move through. I'll go left to right. We do have buttons that are request to speak, but I think this is kind of a small enough body where we can be respectful and kind of just raise your hand if needed. That, and when you request to speak, I have the council members' names, so I don't know actually who's actually punching up. So I'll start from the right side of the dais. Trustee Brandon Vang, if you had any brief comments.
Thank you, Chair Esparza, and Councilmember Arias, Mayor Dyer, members of the public. Thank you for being here tonight. On the request of our board president, I'm happy to be here tonight to discuss and partake in the School Liaison Subcommittee. Tomorrow we will have our regular board meeting, and on the agenda we will have an agenda item, and we will vote on having somebody to permanently be assigned to the School Liaison Subcommittee. And again, I'm happy to be here, and I'm here to represent Sangha Unified School District. And some of you may know that about a third of our students have a Fresno address, and Sangha Unified extends as far west as Jensen and Peach. And I represent Area 3, which is the Sunnyside area of Sangha Unified. And so we are here to make the city a better city and make Sangha Unified School District a better school district. Thank you very much, Chair Esparza.
Thank you, Trustee. President Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Esparza. Thank you to our fellow commission members and, of course, members of the staff and public in the audience. My name is Nandeep Singh. I'm currently the board president for Central Unified School District. I reside in District 3, so I have my own city council member here as well. But very much as Trustee Vang was sharing, we will be having this up for formal nominations tomorrow at our as an agendized item on our meeting for tomorrow evening. Very much looking forward to finding ways to collaborate, to partner, and bring such important institutions of the city together in conversation. Thank you, Chairman Esparza, for helping foment and lead this much needed conversation.
Absolutely. Board President Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and convening this meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations. A number of our projects do overlap. My name is Nasreen Johnson, and I represent State Center Community College District. I'm currently the board president. We have another member, Trustee Magdalena Gomez, who will be the alternate. We were able to put that on our board agenda earlier this month, and so we will be the representatives on this committee. I live in City of Fresno, District 4, and State Center Community College District has a number of campuses. Our Fresno City College, our Clovis Community College, our West Fresno Center that's being built. It's our technical campus, and also our new first responders site, and in addition to some other facilities are all inside the city of Fresno limits. And so I know that the work we do together will be for the betterment of our community and our students, so thank you.
All right, Councilmember Arias.
Thank you, Chair. Just for background of the public and for my colleagues here on the dais, in my district, I have Fresno Unified, Central Unified, Orange School District, 3 charter schools, and State Center Community College, all multiple jurisdictions that are responsible for K-16 public education. I also have the pleasure of having a district that's urban, suburban, and rural, which creates a series of significant challenges, all different in nature. We have school sites that don't have sidewalks and been annexed into the city 100 years ago. We have school sites out in Central Unified that are built in the fringes of our city development. And we have school sites surrounded by industrial development and cows and chickens. And all of them provide a unique challenge for us to get kids to school safely and get them home safely. Over the years, in my tenure here, I've heard informal complaints, concerns, and needs of all the differing school districts and what they need from the city of Fresno in terms of better roads, pedestrian infrastructure, traffic control, the use of our police officers that you guys are paying for. And what I'd like to have out of this conversation is that those informal requests, inquiries, concerns actually become formalized, so that here, while the administration is with us, the mayor and the city manager, they can hear it directly from each of these governing bodies on where there's places of opportunity for us to improve on and where there's places of opportunity for us to collaborate. I will tell you, as a former staffer at Fresno Unified, it's always easy to turn to the city and say, why didn't you build sidewalks and curbs and gutters that connect our school? And it's much harder to ask the school districts, why aren't you building schools where all that already exists? Why build in the fringes of where there is no infrastructure? And that's always a competing challenge, because school districts are building schools where they can, where their houses are being built, houses that were authorized by the city. And what I found astonishing when I arrived to the city is that there is no coordination between the planning minds of the school district and the city officials who are approving these new subdivisions and housing projects. And the school district is only legally obligated to build sidewalks around its school, not to connect its neighborhoods that are being built to those schools. That responsibility falls on the city, and half my district is still county. So convincing our friends across the street and the board of supervisors to build sidewalks, curbs, and gutters, which they literally tell us it's not their job and they won't, and to put streetlights, it's very difficult, but it's also nearly impossible to financially afford it after the fact. All that creates some significant challenges in the planning and development of new schools and connecting them to existing neighborhoods. But I do think there's places of opportunity. I'd like to have us look at how we use our school resource officers differently. I drop off my kids every day and pick them up every day from school, and I can tell you as a parent, there's quite a bit of tickets that can be generated on drop-off and pickup time at any of our school sites. And as parents, I don't think we would be all that mad if the folks who are double parking, triple parking, going too fast, are being ticketed. There's also things that as schools we can do differently. Too many of our schools don't open their gates until an hour or two after kids are dropped off. That becomes a security exposure for kids and families. So I'm hoping that this collaborative space would allow us to lift the most pressing issues that we actually control today with existing resources versus simply calling out a problem that's going to take us decades to figure out how to resolve, which is probably more infrastructure and planning related. Thank you, Chair.
President Burton?
I'm Brian Burton. I'm from the Fresno County Board of Education. I'm the current board president. We did vote on this last Thursday during our meeting that I will currently be the representative with James Martinez as the alternate. He's our board vice president. My area is Area 2 for Fresno County. So we've got about 208,000 students in Fresno County. So I've got about 50,000 of them. And I cover Central Unified, Fresno Unified, and a pretty good chunk of Clovis Unified. So pretty wide variety. Just about me, I've lived in Area 2 since I was 11 months old. So I've sort of been here for a little bit. I won't tell you how long that is because I look a lot younger than I actually am. So, yeah. I tell it's, really deep love for Fresno. As far as the Office of Education is, a main focus of ours is students that have been either at Corton Community Schools and how they're reintegrated back into their school districts, and how a lot of those students, after they exit Corton Community Schools, we're finding that sometimes they're not registering back in their district to actually attend school, or they have a very high dropout rate. And so how do we put services around students who may have been, they're coming from disadvantaged communities. They are very much overrepresented for their populations, especially the Office of Education has a very big effort on African American students. And although they make about 4 to 6% of the total population of the student population, they're about 25% of the population in Corton Community Schools. And how are we reintegrating those students when they're coming back to the districts? And how are we putting services around these students so they're making sure that they are finishing high school and they are having those opportunities? We've had some great partnerships with State Center. And our students who are in Corton Community Schools are now doing, they're actually enrolling in classes through Fresno City College. We're looking at doing some classes out for agricultural sciences at the Juvenile Justice Center. And just really it's a focus on how do we get these students back integrated with schools, trade and technical schools, and give them the skills that they would need to progress on and not re-enter our, not juvenile justice system, but our justice system as a whole.
All right, Trustee Jonathan Rosas, you're on Zoom. Do you have any initial member comments?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Jonathan Rosas. I represent the Roosevelt High area on the Fresno Unified Board. I've had the pleasure of serving on this committee since inception, and we did ratify our participation at the beginning of the year, at last meeting before last, for all our committee assignments. So I do look forward to, as Trustee Arias mentioned, really focusing on solutions and not just talk, and looking over the minutes. A lot of the things that we discussed at the last meeting are still agenda items for this meeting. So I'd love for us to be able to discuss how we actually solve some of these issues without playing the blame game, because ultimately all of our community needs to work together to better our outcomes for our kids and for our society as a whole. I truly believe education and our entire systems are interdependent and interrelated. And the more we can work towards a common goal, which I think that there are several that we can discuss today, the better off our community is going to be. So I'm very hopeful to the discussion and to the agenda items, and hoping that by next meeting, we can actually share progress and updates to what we've worked on respectively and accomplished.
Thank you, Trustee. And then I know the mayor is not technically part of the committee, but we had extra space on the dais, and some trustees more than some trustees didn't show up, so I invited the mayor to sit up here on the dais with us. Mayor, do you have any initial comments?
No, I think, is there going to be an opportunity to discuss the meeting we had at some point?
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
that'll be key, and that meeting was primarily around the infrastructure portion, correct?
Primarily on safe routes to schools and
Yeah, well, that's first
leasing
up.
and so forth, so, yeah, I'll wait till then, thank you.
Perfect, that's first step. Okay, fantastic. I don't think I missed any members. I don't see any other folks on Zoom, just trustee Jonas Santa Rosas. Let's get into the meat and potatoes then. So we have different discussion items, infrastructure, school resource officers, after-school programs, green space, development and land planning, homelessness. So we got a packed agenda. We'll try and get through these efficiently. And we'll start off with a big one, which is the infrastructure and the safety around the schools. And actually, I think a good place to start would be with the administration, the city administration, who has had some preliminary meetings. I think as we were planning this meeting on the legislative side, I believe you had convened the administration along with the executives, superintendents of different districts. So love provide an update, have an update for this body.
You bet. Thank you, Councilmember Esparza. I want to say thank you first for reconvening the school liaison subcommittee meeting. I do think it is important for that work to occur, and I do think it ties in nicely to what we are also doing between our administration and the various school districts, as well as bringing in our department staff. We did have a meeting on January 4th, and the attendees were, we had each of the school districts, Central Unified, Clovis, Fresno County Office of Education, Fresno Unified, and Sanger Unified attended, either the superintendents or their assistants. Also had City Manager present, Deputy Mayor Grundy, and Public Works Director Scott Mosier, and our Police Chief Paco Valderrama were present. And the purpose of our meeting, at least from my perspective, was for us simply to convene the meeting, to facilitate it, to facilitate discussion as it pertains to safety around the school, in school zones, primarily traffic safety. And that was the ultimate purpose. We began by having our police chief talk about and he is here this evening, if there's any questions of him, regarding some of the issues we're seeing today with bicycle and pedestrian fatals throughout the city as well as around the schools. In 2022, there were 28 pedestrian fatals in our city. Far too many. There's some plans underway to address that. Of those, there was one youth, and that was the incident that occurred with Rashad over by Hoover High School. There were 7 bicycle fatalities in our city, and none of those involved a youth. From a public works perspective, we talked about the evaluation process that occurs when there's new construction from one of the school districts within the city. Unlike non-schools developments, the city of Fresno is involved from a CEQA perspective in terms of review and providing feedback, but it's simply recommendations because their formal oversight is at the state level. Did we discuss the communication that occurs in terms of collaboration between the city and the various school districts through liaisons? And that is for the purpose of talking about crosswalk installation, painting of stop signs, traffic signals, speed limit changes, et cetera, within the school zones. We did discuss short-term opportunities in terms of converting school crosswalks to more high visibility, as well as establishing a much more of a distance between where the vehicle stops and where the crosswalk is. Again, that was around schools. We talked about the importance of public education, public service announcements. Fresno Unified really took the lead on this before we ever even had this meeting, and put out a very well-done public service announcement regarding the importance of, from the student perspective of being safe in and around the school zones. We also talked about the need to further some of those public service announcements, which we are in the process of doing with the police chief and as well as some of our city administration and working with all of the school districts regarding future public service announcements. In terms of challenges, I think Councilmember Arias discussed one of them that we noticed that all the superintendents spoke of, and that is schools that are initially built in the county, in the rural areas that are non-incorporated, and then later, at a later time, they're annexed into the city, and they're not built to the city standards, where they have gaps in sidewalks, paved asphalt walkway near schools is lacking, et cetera. So that is something that has to be addressed in terms of long-term solutions for that. Fresno Unified School District is doing a request for proposal at the current time, and it is for a school site assessment of one of their schools, and that it is to address safety issues that may be at multiple sites. The reality is we need to do that at every single school within the city of limits to determine what the safety needs are around those school zones. And then lastly, we discussed everyone agreed the need to have ongoing meetings with those officials or their representatives, maybe in subcommittees perhaps, or smaller groups to identify action items, some of the issues that are low-hanging fruit that we can address right away, identify funding to allow that to occur, implementation of some of the improvements, again, the public service announcements. And then there was also an agreement to bring in, or at least invite, county representatives from Public Works so that we can talk about some of these issues that we're confronted with during annexation. There will be future meetings, and it will be hosted by the Deputy Mayor Grundy, who is going to be chairing those meetings. And I had asked in this last meeting to make sure that minutes were prepared so that each of the superintendents could get those to their trustees, and I trust that they did, and we sent those out to our council members. So we'll be having ongoing meetings, and we'll make sure that we communicate with this body as well.
Thank you, Mayor, for a very thorough update. Good to have that information. Are there any of the members who have further questions for the administration or just general comment on this matter that the administration and the superintendents met on?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Mayor, could State Center Community College District be included in the next meetings? It sounded like just the K through 12s were included.
Yes, that was an oversight, quite frankly, on my part, and I think that should occur because not only are we going to have Fresno City College, but we have Clovis Community College, and now we're going to have the West Fresno campus. So thank you. We'll make sure we reach out. Hadn't thought about that till now.
Yeah, and our First Responders College, I think, is within city limits.
Yes. No, that's actually in the county.
Okay.
But yeah, it's in the county. And, you know, we also probably, I think what we need to do is invite State Center Community College Police. Oh, actually, we did. We did have them at the meeting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Other members with respect to the meeting described by the mayor? Trustee Vang.
Thank you, Chair Esparza. Mayor, thank you very much for the briefing on the infrastructure and safety around schools. As many of you know, safety is at the top of many, if not all, school board discussions, privately and publicly, and you know, it's due. You mentioned about the public service announcement part of the safety. Can you elaborate in more detail what that entails?
So the Fresno Unified put together, it's actually a commercial or public service announcement. And I thought it was well done, but we need to have a series of those that involve all the school districts. So our communications director, Santaya Rose, will be reaching out, already has actually, to the various school districts, communication teams, so that we can better coordinate those in the future. So that's what we're going to be doing. But it's really about the importance for motorists as they're driving around schools to reduce their speed. It's certainly not a time to be on your electronic devices. You know, potentially, well, for the students, again, to make sure that they're not on their electronic devices. You know, there is a change in the jaywalking. There is no more jaywalking laws in California, so we know that could be a challenge, but we want to make sure when students do cross the street, whether in a crosswalk or not, that they're doing so safely.
And if I may make a recommendation to that part of the public service announcement is billboards. I believe it's very effective when parents are driving 5-10 miles an hour near school sites or students walking to and from school sites. They see billboards that entails the safety of going to and from school. And I think visual public service announcement could be another component to the greater part of the public service announcement around safety. And thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor, you know, with respect to the funding component, I know you said that's some of the low-hanging fruit. I know council has heard this before, but I wanted to see if we could have our Public Works Director, kind of again for the benefit of the trustees and the public, kind of describe sort of our method or algorithm or order in which we prioritize the safe routes to schools and that funding, and just sort of describe the funding mechanism overall.
Okay, you want me to do that right now?
Yeah, it would be, I think, appropriate
Sure.
under this item, just
Scott, if you could-
10,000-foot view. Same thing you've told us in the past at the council meetings,
Yeah,
Scott.
thank you.
Just so our trustees understands kind of how that process goes.
All right, good evening, and thank you for being here and the opportunity to share. My name is Scott Mosier, Public Works Director for City of Fresno. Just overall, we have, we incorporate pedestrian bicycle facilities into just about every project. As a city, our council has adopted a complete streets policy, so even when we're repaving a street, we incorporate sidewalks into that unless there's an exception to that, like, it's a developable dirt field in the new growth area. But overall, we have about 27 projects in our adopted budget that are very closely tied to school safety. It's either adding a traffic signal serving the school, improving the pedestrian phasing, or sidewalk pedestrian improvements around that area, and that totals over $80 million of our adopted budget. And those projects are in various stages, either design, acquiring right-of-way, moving into construction. In terms of prioritization, we have a few things. One is there's an adopted active transportation plan for the city that addresses missing sidewalks, bike lanes, and also trails in the community. And that adopted plan, it also breaks those improvements down into highest needs and then midterm and long-term improvements. So example of some high needs areas, a lot of those are in southern and central portions of the city. They also include trails like the Midtown Trail project that's now in construction in the Shields-McKinley area. But process-wise, we work closely with our police department. We gather in accident data and then also look at proximity to schools. When we talk about intersections, that's obviously a big need for signalized crossings, controlled intersections. Those are ranked by things like traffic volumes, again, accidents, proximity to the school. And then lastly, I'd want to share, a couple things. We are starting the process to update our adopted Active Transportation Plan, or ATP is the acronym, this year in our budget. And we've also been very aggressively applying for grants. Again, dealing with school safety, traffic safety around schools. Some other things happening. We've implemented a new measure. The acronym is HAWKS. It's a hybrid beacon, hybrid crosswalk, but basically it's an automated crossing guard. We now have 4 in operation in the city. They're somewhat like traffic signals, but they're not a full signal. They basically are an electronic version of what a crossing guard would do. And actually, Sanger Unified installed one on Fowler Avenue to serve the new campus. Clovis Unified installed one out on Locan for Janet Young Elementary. We have developers installing them, and on top of that, we have a number of grant projects where the city has obtained funding. A good example, Fresno Unified is at First and Home. That's a location where one will be going in. And then also along the First Street corridor further north up at San Jose. So lots of efforts. One last thing I wanted to share is we have an application pending, news of grant funding through the USDOT in Washington for a Vision Zero action plan. So we submitted back in September. We're waiting for news and hoping that could be successful. And again, have a great effort with school districts, police, public safety agencies, and the community toward implementing that plan.
Hey, Scott, I want to give my colleagues kind of an idea of the scope of the challenge when we have to do safe routes to schools after the fact. So I know in my district, we're working on 2 school sites, Adams Elementary and Muir Elementary. Can you give us an idea of what the cost of those projects are and what they entail? Is it both sides of the street, one side of the street? And how long has it taken us from, prioritizing it, applying for the grant money to the point that's actually going to be completed?
Great question. For example, at Muir Elementary, that's a neighborhood that was built. There are some sidewalks, and then quite a bit of the neighborhood does not have sidewalks. So the city through SB1, gas tax measure, we're doing some street repairs and adding sidewalks. That has taken about 3 years from initial budget motion to put some money towards that to now when we're about ready to bid the project, go to construction. Part of that is just the market we're in, staff vacancies, and trying to just a very red-hot market. But the other aspect is a lot of these involve obtaining right-of-way. And in some cases, to get the sidewalk in, maybe we need to move a utility. It may be that we're dealing with PG&E, having to move a pole, which otherwise would block the sidewalk. Another priority project for us is just west of the 99 on McKinley Avenue, near Jane Addams Elementary on the north side of McKinley. So the city went after grant funding. We got notified, but the funding, these federal dollars were not available to start work for about 2 years. Once we started, now we're into the federal environmental process, and we're still in that process today. That's taken over 2 years working with Federal Highways and Caltrans in the environmental stage. So construction on that project is still then 2 years out. But we're excited about the project. It would add a sidewalk on the north side, install bike lanes on McKinley, and a mid-block crossing at Lafayette from the south side to the north side of the street.
What's the cost of each of the projects?
The McKinley project near Jane Addams, that's roughly a $4 million project. The Muir Elementary is about $1.5 million. One other example I'll share in the central unified areas on Polk Avenue near Teague. And that project to improve west side of Polk Avenue, curb, gutter, sidewalk, some storm drain facilities to address flooding in the winter. That's almost $5 million project. And thankfully that one's through environmental and now moving along well.
And then my last question for you, Scott, is how much money do we get every year from Measure C for safe routes to schools to build these kind of projects?
So
sidewalk improvements connecting to school? bike lanes connecting to a school? How much would you say on average we see for Measure C?
So the current Measure C, it has several categories to it. And one thing about Measure C, it's very restricted by category. For adding bike lanes, the city receives about $400,000 per year for adding bike lanes. For trails, we're around $1.5 million per year. As far as a strict category for adding sidewalks, the only eligible source of funding in Measure C right now is what's called the flexible category. The city does receive about $7 million a year in flexible Measure C. However, that's our operations and maintenance budget. Out of that Measure C pot of funding, over $1 million a year goes to operate the traffic signals that we have, for example. Dollars go into just administration, applying for grants, going out and leveraging new dollars.
So is there any set aside in the current measure specifically for connecting schools to existing pedestrian infrastructure or neighborhoods?
There's no set aside in the current Measure C specifically for that. Most of our funding we obtain is through federal and state grants. For example, the State Active Transportation Program.
Thank you. So just want to reemphasize to my colleagues, as you guys are approving new schools and college campuses, Muir Elementary got built there about 100 years ago. McKinley Elementary probably 40 or 50 years ago. So it's going to take us 50 to 100 years to connect those schools with basic pedestrian infrastructure like bike lanes and sidewalks to existing schools. So it's fair to say that when you build schools in the fringes, you should have that kind of expectation before they're connected into the infrastructure of the city. And the biggest local resource we have for roads and infrastructure is Measure C, and there is no set aside for safe routes to schools. So everything's gonna be grant-based, and when we're lucky to get a grant, we're looking at about 5 years, from beginning to completion. So that's why I wanted to point that out, because I think it reemphasizes the point that we hear your concerns, but we have 150 schools in the city. Probably 2/3 of them have some infrastructure need. And so as you guys build your own projects, we're only requiring you to build what you're required, which is on your actual property. And especially towards the west side of the 99, I still get a lot of calls from Shields and Valentine, County Road, Clinton, Ashland, all those areas, which it's unfortunate that I have to tell residents, it'll be 10 years before we put the intersection light in front of the school that's gonna be operational this year. But that is the reality when we're building in the fringes of the city, unfortunately.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate your updates. Did any of the trustees have additional questions for Scott?
Trustee Jonathan Rosas has her hand up.
Oh, oops. Trustee Jonathan Rosas, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. We started off the conversation with low-hanging fruit, and I just want to keep on that theme because I think there are some. One is having a point of contact at the city for our schools for simple, or what we would deem simple things, like painting, a curb red or blue or white as needed around our schools. If things like that could be done expeditiously, or maybe there's a process whereby we could handle some of these things ourselves, or even painting a crosswalk. If the city has a long lead time on painting a high visibility crosswalk, it is not our preference to undertake city infrastructure projects or city responsibilities, but if those are simple things that we can handle and have, some understanding with the city to do, that would be helpful. So having a point of contact, or maybe some language that allows us to do some painting or even planting trees or some simple things would be helpful. In the considerations for pedestrian safety, I just want to put in a plug for barriers between major streets, like we have crossing over to the fair. Those physical barriers, I think, are a very good deterrent for people looking to cross in the middle of busy streets that might prevent people from doing that. So along Cedar, if we're looking at ways of preventing people from crossing when they're not supposed to be, either vegetative barriers or those permanent barriers, they can be done artistically. I think that's just something we should definitely consider. And then we there was a lot mentioned about building on the fringes, and I just want to make the point that a lot of school building is meeting up with demand from residential building, which the school districts don't control. So where there's rooftops, there's going to be a need for school. And so the discussion about coordinated planning is an important one. But I think the building on the fringe conversation has been a sin that, is very well shared. So thanks.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if I might respond on those, the city has enjoyed a good working relationship with the various districts liaisons within the city, within our department. We have our traffic operations and planning division. Our current manager is Jill Gormley, is our city traffic engineer, and on staff also is Amy Scrivener, and she's on point. And our team, we work with each district's liaison to ensure that those priorities are truly representative of the district, because you may have experienced this. It's not unusual for an individual school principal to contact the city, and that request may or may not align with what the district's administration would like to do in that area. So we are always open to those requests, and we're very glad we've been able through that to prioritize certain crosswalks for both repainting, also low-hanging fruit, installing high visibility crosswalks, as well as just updating signage in the area. We also, if there are concerns about speeding, we're able to do the engineering radar speed surveys, and in my time here at least, we have always lowered speed limits. We've never been in a situation in the past 20 years of having to actually raise a speed limit. Contrary to some of our other large cities in the state where they've increased them, Fresno's been able to lower them.
Director, in my years past at Fresno Unified, in the summer before opening the schools, every school would get a touch-up. Curbs and loading zones were repainted, crosswalks were repainted, the school district spruced up the frontage, what we call the curbside appeal of the school. Is that no longer done? Do we not systematically do that at every school before the opening of the new school year?
And as we've grown, certainly there's been the need to add employees, add staffing, and thankfully we have 2 new positions that were in the mayor's budget and approved by the council for our paint and sign group. So that, yes, that is the goal, to be able to address every crosswalk, every location, every year.
So can we give the school districts assurance today that all their schools will be spruced up before the opening of the next school year with a fresh coat of paint for loading zones and crosswalks?
Councilmember, that will certainly be the goal. Most definitely, we're working with our personnel team to get those positions filled and make that happen.
All right, I'm going to make sure we just reflect on the minutes.
Scott, with respect to the trustee's question about the districts undertaking some of that work, are there any legal impediments or sort of logistical impediments to districts kind of undertaking some of those simple tasks on their own, or is that solely the jurisdiction of the city?
The city definitely could issue a street work permit for that work. It would just need to be undertaken by a licensed contractor who has insurance and a street work bond in place, and most definitely. But we want to work together and partner, and There are other opportunities such as when we're going after grant funding, definitely school district support, things like showing local match dollars on those also goes a long way. But undertaking some of that work, that's something that we're open to.
Okay, well, again, not that I'm suggesting that we ought to go that route just yet, but just wanted to get clarification on the trustee's question. Thank you.
Chairman Esparza, I do have a question for
Trustee.
Mr. Mosier. And thank you very much for being here, and thank you for mentioning the automated crossing guard on Fowler Avenue north of Jensen. That's right across from our Ed complex. And I drive through that at least once a day, perhaps 2 to 3 times a day, driving my son to the campus. And it is a great automated crossing guard, and the safety that it puts in, it really helps. But my question to you is, you mentioned that there are 27 projects that was approved or adopted by the City Council with a total of about $80 million. Is that fiscal calendar year, or is that fiscal $80 million?
That is fiscal year. Some of those will carry over into the following year just due to time frame with, for example, PG&E providing power to, say, a new traffic signal, some of the right-of-way issues. But yes, that is fiscal year.
Okay. If you can, I know they may be difficult, but if you can give us a perspective or at least a comparison of previous years' grants that were provided by the city to similar projects. What was the numbers in the previous years before this year of the $80 million that was budgeted for street sidewalks and improvements?
I would estimate the current year we're about 2 to 3 times the amount as previous. And then also another thing worth noting is just I would say also looking back, City of Fresno is very pedestrian and bicycle friendly right now, and there are a lot of projects in that safe routes to school type of area, as opposed to, let's say, widening roadways out in the growth areas of the city. It's a lot more focused on safety, walkability, and school improvements.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Mosier. Thank you for being here and providing this information. Is there a place that the public can see where all these projects for complete streets are happening or are noted? I'm hearing that it might take 100 years, after a school gets built to have some of the streets. I know neighborhoods where I live, we don't have sidewalks, and I just wanted to make sure that those projects exist somewhere with the city, and that those places won't be forgotten.
Absolutely, and they are reflected in the budget documents that are on our website. But also there will be more community engagement on both current and planned and proposed projects with that active transportation plan update that's budgeted this fiscal year.
Fantastic, thank you.
Great. Okay, so we've sort of tackled the funding component, the Safe Routes to Schools component. We have a couple of other components. We have this animal control. I'm not sure which trustee had asked that we put this on the agenda. We are at 6:55 p.m. A lot of these items here are holdovers from the last meeting, just so we can keep the conversation open in case folks did want to discuss. And then some of these were specifically requested to be put on the agenda by different members. So I did want to offer up the animal control conversation. I do not know which trustee asked for that particular item.
That was me.
Okay, you want to go ahead and take that on now?
Yeah, and I'll just be brief. Loose dogs in particular are still a concern for people wanting to walk to and from school. So I know there's significant efforts the city has underway. Just wanted to flag that as we're talking about safe routes to school. I see that as a component because the sidewalks can be there, the pedestrian crosswalks can be there, but if kids are still afraid of dogs and getting bit, and it's a very real danger. I see it every day. And if you check the Nextdoor app, I'm sure you'll see it as well. So putting in a plug for that to be an important component of making sure our kids can get to and from school safely. Thanks.
Chair, can we have the city staff address that? Because I think it was the last meeting that we learned that our initial plan to open up a city animal shelter included picking up stray animals, and I don't think that's worked out quite as we had hoped. I think we're doing something about the staffing of that. So we can have staff address the status of the animal shelter and what we're doing about stray dogs when people call them in.
Good afternoon, Alma Torres, Deputy City Manager. So we are 6 months into the operation of the Animal Center, and we are getting fully staffed. And if council remembers, we were given the opportunity to first explore what our needs are going to be. We did not have sufficient information to make the staffing calls necessary from our previous operators. So we do have some information and we do have some stats. We are working with Best Friends Animal Society, and what they are doing is they are mapping the number of calls within a 1 mile radius over all of these schools here in Fresno Unified. The city of Fresno, so that we can develop response plans and go out to the community and educate. And also we recently hired additional staff to bring education to our community and communication about the obstacles in keeping and maintaining pets with their owners, so that we do not have the number of pets that are coming into the center. So there are different strategies, and we're working on developing that and hopefully bringing that back to council soon.
City staff, or assistant city manager, when do we anticipate being in a position to actually pick up animals from the streets when they're calling in? Do we still need a few more months, end of the year? What are we looking at?
Well, we are picking up animals as we identify them. I think that one of the things that we're not really picking up cats. And the reason for that, as we've brought before council before, is we're trying to participate in the trap, neuter, return program. But we are picking up animals, dogs particularly. And one of the things that we do ask from our citizens is a little bit of help so that we do not become overloaded and overcrowded in our center. As you know, it's just a simple math. The number of animals that come in will at some point overwhelm the center if we don't have the same number of animals coming out. So we do try to offer other resources, and we do try to help our community help us by maybe keeping the animal until we find a home for it, and putting our foster program out there.
That's actually what I wanted to add. It would be wonderful to have all of your support to help us get the word out about adoption and fostering animals. Our center is full, and we have a beautiful center, and when we have animals in there for too long, they become unhealthy and they become behavioral issues, and that is not anything that this community wants. So I don't know if there's any mechanism within your schools, if you can help us get the word out. If somebody, if you're looking for a new pet, hey, come down to the animal center first. It would be wonderful to have partnership of all the districts to be able to maybe help us get informational flyers out as far as what types of animals, the website. We need all the help we can get. As Alma stated, we have just recently hired 2 more people to be out attending events. And so also if you have any sort of large-scale events where you're going to have a lot of attendance, we'd love to be able to come out and put a booth up and provide information so people are aware of what the opportunities are to either adopt or foster animals. We would very much welcome your assistance in being part of the team to help get these animals placed, because None of us want to be in a situation where we were a couple years ago with high euthanasia rates, so that's not acceptable. That's something that community has spoken very loud about that they don't want, but we all have to be part of the solution. So anything that you all could do, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, and I'd be willing to offer to continue that conversation and see if it's a project some of our students want to undertake in an awareness campaign or something, see what we can do on that front. I will say, as a few days ago, I was around Roosevelt and I had a pit bull run up to me with my new dog, and I was scared. Like ultimately it ended up all being fine, but it was a pretty scary experience. And so I know that our communities are experiencing the same thing. So thank you for the attention to this issue.
Yeah, so I think for our outreach folks at the shelter to set up a table at school carnivals with a few dogs and cats, I mean, that might be a easier way to offload some of the inventory into the hands of some eager children and their parents. All good ideas, all very good ideas. Thank you, Trustee, for agendizing that particular item. Trustee Arias, you had one more item under this category.
I do. I wanted to discuss traffic control around our schools and the use of school resource officers. I know that 2 of our districts contract our police department for school resource officers. State Center has their own police department, and the other school districts have their own police department or contract with the sheriff's department. But one of the things as a parent of Fresno Unified kids, I don't see the traffic control taking place around the schools. I think it might happen for a week before school starts, and then it dies down for the rest of the year. Or after a big accident, it reoccurs. So I do see the school resource officers' cars parked in front of a campus, and I know they're doing on-site security because I see them when I walk into a campus. But I personally think that there would be a better use of their time to actually be doing traffic control, because we're the only agency that's authorized to give traffic tickets. Every school site that I'm aware of with Fresno Unified that has school resource officers also has on-site security personnel of their own, which do a lot of the security management issues of a school site. So my gut feeling tells me that we're duplicating services by having a police officer on site with 5 or 7 security guards on site in the beginning and the end of a school site, where they could be doing traffic control, where is where we're seeing some of the accidents. But I'd rather leave it to the expert in charge of that field for your feedback on how we can get more folks ticketed before and after school, as our kids are being hit by way too many vehicles.
Good evening, Paul Cabalderrama, Police Chief. Thank you for your input on that, Council Member. I would really like to do the traffic enforcement with traffic and motor officers. I realize that we have a police vehicle parked at certain sites, and I'm getting my updated numbers. Right now, we have 27 officers at different schools. That includes 3 different school districts. The majority of them are Fresno Unified, but they have over 100 sites. There's no way we could have a police officer at every site at drop-off and pickup at every location, such as elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. The intent of the SRO program is to protect the facility, the kids, the administrators, teachers, everyone involved. If we have them outside doing traffic control, well, number one, if you've ever been to any drop-off site, pickup site, they're incredibly congested. Having a police officer in an SUV actively doing traffic enforcement is not going to help the situation. They may be able to get 2 or 3 tickets and at the same time congest and make prolong the drop-off time. So I don't think that's our best method and best use of the SROs. As we expand our motors unit, as you know, the mayor gave us more police officers to be in the traffic unit, to basically focus on street racing and sideshows. With the addition of those 10 officers and 1 supervisor And when we're able to fill in 10 more vacancies that we have in that unit, that's going to give us a lot more police officers that are going to be riding a much more mobile vehicle, like a motorcycle. I would rather have them proactively enforcing those areas with a higher degree of congestion issues, traffic violations, moving violations. And that way, those officers who are trying to build a rapport and a relationship with the kids and the parents are not negatively affecting that by sitting there hammering people with tickets.
And Chief, that's why you're the expert and I'm not, so.
But I share your sentiments, and definitely this is a main priority for our police department.
So speaking of traffic control, if anybody drives in the city, you know that if you speed on Palm, you'll get a ticket because there's always traffic control on Palm, right? There's very few schools on Palm. There's more churches than schools on Palm, but you get a lot of tickets there. We've now prioritized street racing on Herndon and every other part of the city where it occurs, but I'm still struggling to understand why haven't we prioritized our current existing traffic unit. I know there's limited resources and you have vacancies on the schools in which multiple accidents have occurred, right? You have a high school campus with 4,000 kids at Sunnyside, with 3,000 kids at Fresno High, with a couple of thousand kids at Roosevelt. I never see a traffic control presence there. I see it on Palm. I see it by Fresno State when there's a Bulldog game, at St. Martin Center when there's a concert. It seems to me that whenever the interest is big enough, we find either contract policing or overtime to respond to that need. But I just haven't seen it for schools yet.
Well, let me explain to you why. We had about 3,400 injury accidents last year. 10 were at or near schools, at or near schools. What we do is we take statistical information, and wherever we have our fatality accidents, wherever we have the highest number of moving violations, that's where we do the major enforcement. It's all based off of stats. It's based on complaints. You know, when a council district calls and says, hey, we're having an issue, then we target that area for a certain amount of time in order to send a message that, you know, we're out there, we're enforcing the law. The schools are a priority. But a lot of that information is based off of, or a lot of our enforcement activity is based off of statistical information. We do have a working relationship with every school district. If any principal calls our office and lets us know about an issue, we're going to go out there and we're going to enforce that. At this point, we just simply don't have enough motorcycle officers to be obviously everywhere. But I really think in this year, you're going to see a big change in that, because as we add police officers, as we add a street racing team, as we fill 10 different vacancies, those traffic officers are very proactive, and they do a lot. By the way, we actually gave more citations in 2022. We increased our number of citations than we had the previous year. The previous year had about 5% more officers in that particular unit. So they're definitely working hard.
Thank you, Chief. And I want to reemphasize that what the public sees is 36 officers at a football game doing traffic control. You know, 36 officers at a Save Mart concert doing traffic control. Probably 10 dozen at the fairgrounds doing traffic control. But they don't see them at Friday night football games at a high school. They don't see them at schools during drop-off and pickup when there's 200,000 students going to school every day. So the perception has become very clear that when it comes to entertainment venues, we find the bodies through contracted services or overtime. When it's school sites, we're spread thin. So it goes back to my ongoing broken record of, if Walmart can get a police officer, why can't the homeless shelters? Right?
And it's a perception issue as well. You know, my response to that is that every one of those venues, every one of those football games, every one of those, you know, whatever, a concert, whatever it may be, those are not on-duty police officers. Those are officers who are working on their day off to supplement their income. You know, it's important to notate that. Now, as far as the football games, as the high school football games, we do have, you know, sometimes 2-3 SROs working those games. They should be helping with traffic control, ingress and egress, to make sure that people are able to get home safely and get into the game safely.
So if school districts are willing to pay for contracted police officers to do traffic control on their schools, would we be amenable to that? The same way we do a football game at Fresno State?
Absolutely. I wouldn't deny a contract just like I don't deny Walmart a contract.
Okay. Well, you can deny Apple. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
I have a I have a follow-up question. I might have misunderstood, but you said that you use data. I appreciate every time our decisions are informed by data, but you said that you use the data of statistically where there have been accidents or tickets written for, but if we don't have officers there writing tickets, then that'll just, the data would be incomplete, right? Because there aren't, there wouldn't be data of tickets being written, maybe perhaps around a school where there's a
No,
need.
you did misunderstand. I'm sorry if I explained that incorrectly. Basically, what we use is moving violations, complaints, and accidents. So if I have a certain intersection and I see that there's a lot of injury accidents, I have to do something about it. And if that particular intersection has, for example, 10% more injury accidents in another area, I have to be proactive about it and go out there, because it may be a traffic light out, it may be some kind of other traffic control device that is not present, or maybe we need to add one. So my officers go out there and they're proactive. So no, it's not based off of, hey, we're getting a lot of tickets here, so let's keep on giving. No, as a matter of fact, it has the opposite effect. When we show up to a certain part of town and we give a lot of citations, typically people start obeying the law, and we don't have to be there any longer. And that's kind of the point, is that to affect the areas that are where people are getting hurt, and it's about public safety. It's not about generating anything. So that's how we do that. So the data is based off of complaints, citizen complaints, incidents. After the very tragic Hoover incident, we pulled the data citywide, and we discovered that in the entire year we had 10 incidents, not in front of the school, near the vicinity of the school in the entire year. When you compare that to over, close to 4,000 injury accidents that we responded to, it's a very small percentage, but schools obviously have to have a high priority because our kids are there.
I did want to add, one of the things we found in our meeting was that not all the incidents that occur with students being encountered by a vehicle, maybe they're being dropped off, or maybe they were bumped by a vehicle or something, that's not reported to the police. And so we need to have a better system. I think any incident involving a student that has a hit by a vehicle, nearly hit by a vehicle, whatever that needs to be somehow conveyed to the police department so we can have the most accurate
The mayor
data.
makes a great point. We don't know what we don't know. And if an incident involving a traffic accident and a child and a student near a school is not reported to us, well, then that's incomplete data. So we're basing it off of actually or reports that were actually reported, where a 911 call was made and the police officer responded. Any other questions I can answer?
What would be the process for reporting, say, I wanted to report an incident near a school? What would that process look like?
You would call 911, and if it is an injury accident, the police department will respond. We are mandated, internally to respond to all injury accidents.
Okay. There's no other way other than calling 911?
Well, that's the fastest and most effective way is to call 911.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, trustee, thank you, chief. I think we've run the gamuts on this item A, which I think was very much a big reason we decided to call the meeting. Any other comment or questions with respect to the infrastructure and safety around schools or around the school resource officers specifically? Okay. All right, there's A and B. Was there a trustee that had asked to agendize after-school programs? Okay, maybe they did not come, or maybe that might have been a holdover. Any discussion on the green space or joint use, or any of the sub-points about coordination with parks or urban greening?
That was me again.
Fantastic. No, I mean, your FUSD is the largest district in the largest K-12 district in the city, so we appreciate your participation.
Thank you. And we appreciate very much the continued coordination with the Parks Department. The blue and green, the blue space and the green space are incredibly valuable for our community. And so as we're after COVID, I wanted to offer more opportunities for partnerships to ensure I'm particularly concerned about having enough lifeguards to open up the pools this year, and so wanted to offer up if there's ability to partner for some of our students to get those as first summer jobs. Just want to make sure that we're planning with enough ahead of time to make sure that we can have enough lifeguards to have those spaces open. So that was one point I wanted to make in that. And two, with respect to the green space, I know with Measure P, the city is doing a lot more, ramping up a lot of activities, and wanted to explore also additional ways of coordination, some of the things that we might not have been able to explore due to lack of funding in the past. And so put that on the radar for conversations about not just staffing, internships for our students, opportunities for our students to get maybe an internship or a summer job or something like that. I know some stuff is in the works that you guys have done, but maybe a more formal partnership. And also explore, so I'm adding maybe 3 things under that. Also explore, as you're looking to invest Measure P funds, that you don't forget about the schools as shared spaces for people to recreate, and maybe some of these infrastructure improvements to get people to and from these shared green spaces could be things that Measure P considers or covers, or additional enhancements so that they can function more as parks, et cetera. So wanted to put those things on the radar.
If I may, Chair, I wanted to reemphasize Trustee Jonathan's point here. COVID, as we all recover, especially those of us who are parents, have set our kids behind a year or two academically. Social emotionally, history would be the judge of that. But luckily for the city of Fresno and our neighboring districts, we are in a good financial position to actually help them catch up. You know, Fresno Unified probably has about $700 million of COVID recovery money. I'm sure every school district here also received their big chunk of money to help kids catch up. In the city of Fresno, we have Measure P that can be used for after-school programs and recreational programs. So I do believe there's an opportunity for us to intentionally get on the same page on offering after-school both academic and recreational activities across the whole city to catch up our kids for the lost instruction and socialization time for the last couple of years. So I do think this is going to be a huge window of opportunity if we collectively simply use the money as business as usual or for big staff raises. We're not going to catch up our kids. So I think this is an opportunity for us to completely flip the script and look at some investments, and whether they happen at your school sites or they happen at our community centers and parks. I think that's the least of our challenges, is just that it actually occurs, because we're probably going to be hiring people that you educated, or I'll give you a short story. We opened up the warming centers as storm centers, and they were open 24 hours a day. A lot of the people in those centers were from your respective cities: Selma, Sanger, Clovis, Fresno, Parlier, because no other city opened up shelters like we did, so they all came here. But the biggest takeaway for me was that we were always concerned with, Parks Department has never operated an emergency shelter. We're used to operating parks and recs programs. We may not be prepared to handle the gamut of our homeless population or those who need emergency shelter. But what I learned is of a lady named Sissy at Tetsie Wills Community Center in Tower District. She's a special ed teacher for Fresno Unified for 22 years. And she was operating that shelter with 100 homeless residents like it was any kindergarten class. Engaging, inclusive, respectful, adoring. We share talent, is my point, and we share opportunity if we can come together with our one-time resources of the school district for pandemic recovery and our ongoing resources under Measure P in a way that could be dramatically different for our kids.
Director, I know you wanted to, I saw you were prepared to respond to the trustees' initial comments regarding coordination with parks.
Right. Aaron Aguirre, Parks Director. Just wanted to respond on the lifeguard opportunities for our students. We, this past year, hired 71 various lifeguards. 13 of those were senior guards and then pool supervisors. Oftentimes, those lifeguards come from our schools. So we work with Fresno Unified. We gain access to the pool deck and work with the swim teams to get the students to apply for our lifeguard positions. A lot of these lifeguards start off as a lifeguard, work their way up to a senior lifeguard, pool supervisor, and so forth. So those relationships are being made. In addition to that, we've actually expanded out to Central Unified with the board there to see if there are any additional students there that we can reach. So those relationships continue to be built on the lifeguard piece and employing our youth. So just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Director. Other trustees have input or comments or questions on this topic? With respect to your districts. Okay. The urban greening, Trustee Jonathan Rosas, was this you as well on the urban greening part, or was that someone else?
Yes, and that was just on, also related to these safe routes to school, that trees and forms of shade are also, if it's nice and shaded, it's more likely that kids are going to want to walk. There's a lot of students that walk on Huntington, and it's just a nice walk. They walk to Roosevelt, but when it's not a nice shaded walk, especially when it gets hotter, it's not as likely as the kids are going to walk. So that was the point there. I know that like Tree Fresno and some other community groups have wanted to plant more trees in the city right away around schools. And so again, just putting in a remark that trees around schools and on the way to schools would be something that we'd like to see prioritized. And, trees everywhere in the city are important, but if we're going to make corridors of transportation, that they're also an incentive for people to choose to walk or use other modes of transportation.
Sure, and I know, Mayor, did we do something in this last budget with respect to increasing the number of trees that we're planting out of the city?
We did Councilmember Maxwell, I think, did 1,000 trees that we were put together on top of the trees that we had, which I don't know, 300 or something, so.
And Mayor,
Director.
that is correct. So the city of Fresno committed $400,000 a year to kind of start things off, and it's an initiative for 1,000 net new trees per year through 2035, and then we're doing things like working with Tree Fresno and CAL FIRE. Actually, Huntington Boulevard is due to receive some new trees actually by the end of the week that will be going in. And then we have a great Clean California grant that'll address the Belmont Avenue corridor, kind of near First Street, Fresno Street. So that's going to be about 120 new trees. So lots of efforts in that area.
And Scott, what's our normal planting of trees per year in addition to those two?
Well, I think we're really in kind of a new normal. When we came through the Great Recession, that number was virtually zero. But now we're upwards of 1,000. We will meet our target this year.
Director, I know residents cannot usually plant trees on our right-of-way. They need our permission, right? Can school districts do that? If they wanted to plant trees along their school sidewalks, could they do that, or would we have to require them to put like irrigation connected to their system?
The great question, and we've had some really good partnerships with the school districts. For example, with Fresno Unified, I think a perfect example is a big project we did near Bullard High School in partnership between city staff and the district's facilities team. And a number of student volunteers, and planted trees all along the northern property line, along the Browning side. of the school campus. So we're very open to that, and residents, property owners actually can come and pull a no-fee permit for planting street trees along their frontages at their homes.
Question, are we only planting male trees because they aren't fruiting, or are we also planting female trees? I ask because allergies are a concern for many students and adults in our community, and I just want to make sure that we're, wherever possible, are balancing the male and female tree populations.
Yes, we have a certified arborist on staff and a very carefully selected street tree palette. So we are very careful about fruiting, what drops, and then having a healthy balance, not too many all of one species or variety, otherwise they become susceptible to disease.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So is there a plan as to where the trees are going to go? Because I guess my question was more specific as to requesting that they be prioritized around schools or safe routes to school or those pedestrian areas so that we can increase people utilizing. You know, if they're going to be evenly distributed throughout the city, that's one thing, and that's great. I love trees. But the request was more specific that they be prioritized in a corridor to create a shaded kind of environment for people to walk.
Let me speak to that. That most definitely is a priority. However, our top priority is very honestly making sure that the trees are planted in an area that they can be maintained long term. One of the big keys is water. The city has less than 1% of the street trees irrigated by city systems. That's not deemed problematic, but rather because private property owners, that's the means by which trees are irrigated along frontages. So for example, with schools, as long as there's irrigation on site and can be extended out to that park strip and that perimeter, just because we need to make sure that the tree will be healthy, it'll be watered, and it'll be maintained. So as long as those are met, then most definitely looking to create that shade, air quality benefits, and everything else.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Move on to our common land planning. We had a couple of requests. One being just coordinating our Blackstone Avenue development. I believe they came from State Center Community College District.
Yeah, so I just wanted to open the conversation about the Blackstone development and the corridor. I know that the city has a number of plans with the intersection at McKinley and Blackstone. We're building numerous new buildings and structures along Blackstone, and so I just want to make sure that our lines of communication are open, to make sure that any developments we're doing, we're letting you guys know what's happening and where our heads are, and also any, we would hope the same, so that way we can be in conversation about the things that you're doing along that Blackstone corridor. It is, I think, going to be a real jewel of our community, and we have another facility along the Blackstone corridor, our Radcliffe Stadium, which is in a state of disrepair. So I'm going to just state that it would be ripe for partnership of a joint use space. And so I would like to, to have a stadium right there along Blackstone that is usable by the community, by our colleges, by our high schools, I think would be really incredible, not only for the businesses, but for, our whole community. And it is a large project, and so we would, I think, be looking for some conversation and partners there.
Okay, I'll just, brief comment, I think we probably should have maybe a side discussion on Radcliffe Stadium. I'd be interested to hear, I was not aware that it was in a could not be, I guess, I don't want to say disrepair or whatever, but we should have a separate conversation about that. Yeah, there are a lot of plans. I think we are in communication with our grade separation. I know we've met with Chancellor Goldsmith regarding that, and making sure that we are being least disruptive to students that are coming to and from City College, even though that may ultimately extend the project. But we know it's important not to interfere with students coming to and from. So that's our commitment to you. But I think we should have a separate meeting on from. So that's our commitment to you. But I think we should have a separate meeting on Ratcliffe Stadium. I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, even the art, that was, there was a couple of art selections for the McKinley-Blackstone intersection. I didn't recall one being specific to education or anything like that. And so I just want to open up that conversation as to like, it is kind of the gateway to higher ed right there, Blackstone and McKinley. So it'd be nice to feature that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would concur with having a follow-up meeting. Myself and the mayor, I represent the district, and be yourself and the trustee representing the district as well on your ends, as well as the chancellor and any other relevant staff in terms of, it sounds like you may have some ideas, or maybe you guys have spoken about this, so we'd love to engage, kind of hear about what those might be, what kind of prospects.
Chair, for the benefit of the committee and the public and our work in trying to hammer down common planning, at least knowing what each of us is doing, can we have staff, maybe Director Mosier, work up a GIS map for our benefit that not only includes the location of school sites, but also the locations of future school sites that each of our partners are planning to build? I'm sure by now they've acquired property and they have an idea of where the next, elementary or middle or high school is going to be developed, or college campus. That way, we at least can see one visual of the interconnectedness or disconnect between infrastructure and public facilities.
Is that a fairly viable request, Director?
We'd be glad to work with the team in our Information Services Department with ISD. A lot of those elements are things we don't immediately have oversight of in Public Works, but we can work with the group in ISD and make that happen, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah, we can.
We do have school sites currently included in GIS. As far as future sites, those are likely not all shown. But things that are known would be in there. If there's additional data that the districts have, we can certainly incorporate that into the mapping.
I think there's a regional GIS, like between all the governmental agencies, that maybe they could bring that to. I think they meet once a month.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so like all the GIS from cities, counties, school districts, they have a once-a-month meeting jointly on data sharing. And they could pull like property records on, publicly owned pieces of property by all the districts, and probably produce that out of that committee.
Yeah, some data gathering for the prospective sites, probably the hardest part of it all. Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, I mean, not all property would be a campus, but most of them probably are going to be campuses. So with respect to development and prospective planning, do any of our partners, off the top of your head, have any prospective sites that you think are relevant to share here today? Trustee Singh, President Singh.
We've started construction. We're hoping to open at the fall of 2024 a new elementary school on Shields and Brawley. And then we have just acquired another site and are expecting to bring that online, for an elementary school to bring that online. I'd have to check the county, city sort of lines, but it's on sort of Dakota and Grantland area.
Thank you for sharing, President Singh. Okay, any other discussion around common land planning or any developments within each district? Okay. Looks like we covered common land planning. Moving on to our last discussion item, homelessness. So we had a couple of partners, a couple of districts ask about just the impact of homelessness on our campuses. and also youth homelessness. So I'm not sure which districts asked for this, but I'd be happy to let them lead the conversation.
If I may, Chair, for the city manager's benefit, I'm getting quite a bit of more frequent complaints from school sites that when they call 911 or the police department to report folks on campus, they're now typically homeless and transient, and police isn't responding as quick as it used to. So I don't know if it's short staffing, but it's become so frequent now that we're not getting the same kind of response time when people are calling in trespassing on school sites.
I will have to check with Paco on that and take a look at the data. I haven't heard that, so we'd be happy to take a look and see what the problem is and what the solution is.
Okay.
But thank you, I hadn't heard that.
Thank you.
President Singh.
Just to underscore Councilmember Arias' point, we had an incident, I'd have to double check if it was last week or the week before, and one of our high school campuses in Central Unified, and it created quite a bit of actually disruption for a period of time before PD came and was able to escort the person off the premises.
Okay. Are any of the districts here that are represented today, were any of you the ones that asked for this specific item?
I asked for youth homelessness, so let me know when we get there.
Okay. Well, we can move on to that portion unless anyone else had additional comments or questions with respect to the impact on campuses. It might have been one of the districts that is missing in action today. But we can move on to the youth homelessness item.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to open up the conversation. Previously, our community has had a great resource in Fresno EOC's Sanctuary Youth Shelter, which had been open for almost 30 years. But unfortunately, it's no longer a resource and it has closed. Youth under the age of 18 don't have a place to go. While they are encouraged to go to the drop-in center, youth under the age of 18 are told that if they don't have a place to stay that night, they will get, CPS will be called. And so youth have not been, rightfully so, showing up at those places because, it's not safe. I know the Fresno City buses, and I think almost all of our institutions have safe place facilities on site, and I'm not sure if everyone's aware that the shelter, which was the primary place that youth under the age of 18 would go when they called safe place, that has been closed. So I just wanted to bring that up for discussion. And make sure that folks were aware that that's no longer a resource. And I looked online, and it looks like there are emergency shelters for youth under the age of 18 down in the LA area, and up in Modesto, there's one, but there's nothing that I'm aware of anywhere close to us.
Unfortunately, Phil Sky was not able to be here. He had a family commitment tonight. But when Councilmember Esparza's office had inquired, he had suggested that the EOC be invited. And so there was dialogue back and forth. And I know that we have had the former director of the sanctuary who's come a number of times and who's very upset about the repurposing of the sanctuary. But we'll probably good to have another conversation with EOC because from what Mr. Sky tells me, there still is bridge housing and youth housing options that EOC is running. It's just not the sanctuary site. So we probably need to get some clarification on that.
There's nothing for youth under the age of 18 unless they're with an adult.
Unless they're with an adult.
Yeah, so the youth shelters that they are operating, to my knowledge, are 18 to 24, 25-year-olds.
Okay.
And so that would eliminate, I know a number of our schools utilized, the teens utilized the youth shelter when they were having arguments with their family members or friends, a number of youth, when they were coming out as LGBTQ and their families would throw them out. This is where our youth ended up, which gave them a safe place to stay for up to 30 or so days, and that's no longer an option. And so I personally know of a youth who was pulled off of a fax bus, right, because that's a safe place. They were there to get a ride to the shelter, and Fresno PD had to pull them off because that was no longer an option. And so I just want to bring that up because that, I think, is a severe concern that impacts all of our schools and all of our young people.
And President Johnson, if I may, this is where I think as peers, we're going to have to be very honest and direct with each other on resources and jurisdictional responsibilities. And this is where I see K-12 and the County of Fresno really stepping in. You know, K-12 has a record amount of resources, one time in nature. If the districts on the dais today or online would get together and provide funding for any said organization to operate a youth shelter, which is desperately needed, it would be operational within 30 days. If the County of Fresno stepped forward and, you know, provided some funding as they receive it for it. But I can tell you that as a city, personally speaking, we have our hands full with housing the homeless, the adults, the pedophiles, the rent burden, the mentally ill, the drug addicted. Our focus on top of that has been to house the families with children, and we've prioritized any family with children to get housing first, but they are with children. I don't see us having the capacity to go into the youth shelter space, but I do believe that there are some partners here today and in the County of Fresno or the County Office of Education that can step forward and, you know, to that gap of need. You know, oftentimes people ask me, what's the role of the County Office of Education? And this is one of those places where they should have the leadership role. They oversee every K-12 system in the county. They have the most expensive, highly compensated superintendent in the whole region, and they operate one school. So I think they have the bandwidth and the responsibility to step into this gap and maybe, you know, stand up a youth shelter that is desperately needed and has been closed by choice by EOC, decision I don't agree with, but I think this is a place where the County Office of Ed should step up and maybe, you know, provide some leadership with some financial support of the other K-12 districts, because I can tell you, our folks are lifting, they're doing God's work with the homeless community, and a shelter for the youth under 18 unaccompanied is not something that we would have the capacity to take on, frankly speaking. So I think this is where we're going to rely on our other educational partners in the County of Fresno and the County Office of Ed to lead this discussion, and we would be supportive. If you guys need facilities, if you need permits, if you need development help, we can help with all that, but I think this is a place for us to play a supportive role and not a primary role.
Elizabeth has her hand up.
So I did see that. So we do have Trustee Jonathan Rosas with her hand up, as well as Crystal with Fresno EOC is also now a panelist. She's been in attendance. Before we go to them on Zoom, I did want to, I saw President Burton wanted to respond and maybe have some comment about your capacity over at FCSS and the Board of Ed.
Yeah, that might be more of a discussion on funding items. You know, the Office of Ed's a little different than school districts. Most of the school district spending is discretionary, and most of the Office of Ed's funding is restricted. And so we're pretty heavy, really restricted on what we can and can't spend projects on, and have very little discretionary spending. I do agree that that is probably an item that rests with the County of Fresno, where the County of Fresno would play as a lead role because they do have that ability to take in youth and have a responsibility for those youths who are unhoused, is what I'm going to call generally the situation they're in, because they would come under the care and control of the county not of the school. The school does not take that, the Office Ed doesn't take that responsibility, but the Department of Social Services and their child welfare services can take that responsibility of care and control of a child who's unhoused. And so they would be looking at how their funding is. I can tell you it's a little restrictive from my experience because some of the restrictions that are required in the housing facilities that they have to develop for them, that there's quite a bit of barriers when it's operated. So I know that they're looking at ways right now of entering in partnerships with other community members to take in youth who have nowhere to go that night. I think we all saw some items in the news on where kids were being housed and the conditions they were in, and that those really needed to be improved. And so they've really sort of made a focus on it, but there's just not enough capacity, and that capacity does need to be increased. And I think the county is really they would be the lead on that.
I would, I want to challenge us because I don't think the county is where students and their families would willingly go. It would be like somebody showing up at the jail saying, hey, I need a place to stay. I know it happens, but that is literally a last resort for folks. And I really do believe that like the All for Youth program, which is fantastic from the Fresno County Office of Ed, could maintain, because it is all about mental health and those critical relationships that teens are experiencing in their family units, which have really just been exacerbated by COVID and the last few years. And so I don't want to just put this at the county's door, because I think they will ignore that call and not be a resource that our community needs.
Well, and All for Youth is a good example, but All for Youth is a partnership between the Department of Behavioral Health and the Office of Education. So really, it's the funding element is coming from the Department of Behavioral Health. The implementation is coming from the Office of Education. So that's where I say that really the item is a funding source, because the nature of, funds of being restricted at the Office of Ed.
So trustee, with that understanding, if the school districts or the city were to provide funding, could the county Office of Education commit to the execution or explore it? Not commit, but explore.
Or the board would discuss that with the superintendent, as the superintendent, COFR, would have the responsibility for implementing the program, staffing it. And I know that we are always looking to expand services where we can to fill the gaps.
Okay. I think there's an
That's where
opening.
All for Youth came from, and really it's becoming sort of a state model for a lot of
Yeah.
places.
And I know in my K-12 history, the county Office of Ed really operates as the, back office for most school districts except for the big ones, and provides gap resources like professional development, financing of all the smaller districts, so special ed services. So they have a history of providing that gap service, but you're right, you have to figure out the ongoing funding source for operating the youth shelter. But from my take, if you can operate a juvenile hall educational facility, this is probably much easier to take on if you have the commitment from the partnering or agencies.
That's just where, as a lead, I talk about lead in funding the activity. Just there's not that discretionary revenues for us.
Well, I've seen you, President Burton, taking furious notes this whole time, so I think I trust he'll take this back to the board, and I know the superintendent attends every single meeting, having been on that board, and sat right next to the superintendent for every one of those meetings. So hopefully it's a topic of discussion about, if not the funding, then the capacity for execution.
And the mayor's best friend was Superintendent Cofer, so I'm sure he can also encourage her to step into that gap.
All right, let's move over to Zoom. I'm gonna give Crystal the floor, and then followed by Trustee Jonathan Rosas. Crystal, you are now on the panelists, and we appreciate your presence here tonight. I know you've been listening this entire time, and would love to have your input based on the conversation thus far.
Hi, everyone. So like said, my name is Crystal Streets. I'm the Homeless Services Manager. And I was in the discussions of the closing of the youth shelter, which was a blow to the Fresno EOC. But one of the things that I want to just make sure everybody knows is that we didn't close the shelter just as a blink of the eye. The funding changed. The type of clients that we received at the youth shelter were clients that had behavioral issues. They were being brought in by their parents. When the funding changed, we weren't able to serve those youth anymore. We had to serve the youth that were homeless or runaway with no safe place to go, which means if a homeless or runaway youth came, which was very rare, we had to first triage to see if they had another place to go. And they did. And we had to send them there first. And that's based off the funding. We wanted to keep that shelter open. So I just want to be included, or my supervisor, Misty Blanco, in these situations or any discussions regarding youth, because that wasn't something that we did lightly. Knowing that the youth shelter has been here for a very long time, that we served these youth for a very long time, it was great. But the majority of the youth that we served did not fit the category, and unfortunately, we had to change with the funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Moving over to Trustee Jonas Rosas. Now you've had your hand raised throughout this discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate that the conversation's moving towards maybe a solution, but I think that this also points to me for better communication. Maybe I can get something cleared up, because it's been my understanding that a part of the impetus to change the shelter was City of Fresno funding to serve a different clientele. Am I mistaken in that? Did the City of Fresno not provide funding to change the shelter?
We, as a city, have never provided funding for the EOC sanctuary facility. Our funding for homeless have always, and homeless youth specifically, through the Community Development Block Grant Program, was always on the adults and families with children, never a youth-only facility. That was funded through, I think, the Community Development Block Program that EOC gets directly, and other state resources. But the only funding that we've had historically has been for adults and essentially women with children, not unaccompanied youth.
Right, correct. Let me rephrase that: the funding to change from all youth to, from all minors to homeless youth came from the City of Fresno.
No, we did not play no role in directing what kind of homeless population EOC serves. No.
So the city didn't provide any funding?
So, Elizabeth, let me explain.
Okay. Thank you.
There was funding provided by the city for the N Street site. However, that funding came in October, November. We made the decision to shut down the youth shelter in July. So we didn't have a plan for funding. It's just, we had meetings with several people, and I can't go into that right now. My supervisor's trying to actually log on. And that decision was made in July when the board made that decision. The funding that you're discussing from the city came way later.
Correct.
And that wasn't because of any closure. It was because we had an open building and we needed to serve additional people.
And just to be crystal clear, the city put out a request for proposals to serve the homeless population, adults in shelters and family and children in shelters. EOC was one of the respondents for the women and families bucket of dollars, and they were awarded money based on what they requested. So was Marjorie Mason Center awarded money for sheltering women and children. But we have never historically funded EOC's youth-only shelter, nor did they apply as a youth-only for unaccompanied minors funding, because our funding was only for women and children and adults.
Councilmember, I'm gonna, Misty, Director, hopped on. So Misty, I'm gonna give you the floor. I think it's probably appropriate time for you to chime in.
Thank you. Good evening. Sorry I couldn't get here early. we had point in time stuff happening. But I think Crystal said it best, but I did want to just make sure we reiterate the fact that we did not apply for funding through the city until after we had already made the difficult decision to close that shelter. A lot of the criteria that you talk about of who may need the shelter or the previous shelter and who we previously could serve comes under that prevention and early intervention funds. And years ago, the shelter did have funds through the County of Fresno. And I don't quote me on years, but I mean, it's been several years with that funding. And then as, you know, federal funds got more restrictive, those decreased. And so that's kind of where we had that gap. But I think there's still a need for that prevention and early intervention where we see the gap, or I'm sorry, not gap, where we see the lack of numbers is in the unaccompanied homeless youth. And I would say that because the city and the county have done a great job of increasing our family shelters. And so you don't have situations where a parent and a child goes to Marjorie Mason Center and now the other child has to come to the shelter, which is what used to happen years ago. They would separate the families. And so we don't see that as often. And so that's where we see that low number. And to Nazarene's point, and maybe this is a conversation we can have, the fact that FPD pulled a child off of the fax bus and didn't actually take them. I'm not sure why that happened, but we are still open to be able to triage those situations and go through that case plan with them and determine. And we've had several situations like that in the past year. And like Crystal said, all of them had a safe place to go. And so we worked with the families. We even offered in-home case management services with them. So I hope that answered some of that.
Misty, the website on Fresno EOC under Safe Place still says that youth are going to be transported to the Sanctuary Youth Shelter. And I know the website's been updated numerous times over the last few months. And so I guess my question, since you guys are on the phone, is has this information that the youth shelter is no longer available to serve the population it's been serving for 30 years, has that been shared with the community? Because I haven't been seeing information. I haven't seen the Safe Place stickers come off the fax buses. I haven't seen any of the things. I know that we're still saying it's a safe place, but it's changed from what it has been for 30 years, and I don't think we've shared that with people.
So Safe Place is still operational and they still should be transported, but to our T Street location. That's still a program that exists. We still will work with young people as they come in. And as I said, we'll triage that. The website should be reflective of that new address, and I will double check that. But all of our partners were notified. And so everyone has been notified that is a current Safe Place location of the change, as well as if you do the text for help, that same address, or the address has been updated in that system as well, because it's still operational. It just doesn't come with a 24-hour shelter for the under 18. And Safe Place actually has increased. We actually can serve 24 and under now. So if not just a young person under 18, but someone who's in crisis that's 19 or 20, we also can serve them as well through that particular program.
Thank you both, Misty and Crystal, for joining us, and it's going to give me some insight on the closing. Do any of the other trustees comment or question? I see Trustee Islas, or President Islas of Fresno Unified has joined us. President Islas, you have the floor.
Thank you. I am so sorry I was double booked and that delayed me getting on, but I have no doubt that my colleague, Trustee Jonathan Rotas, represented it as well. I did not have a comment, but it was not related to the shelter per se. So I'm happy to wait until if there are others who wanted to comment on the shelter.
Yeah, let's table that for 1 second and just see if there are any other further comments on this particular item. Okay, seeing none, all we had left after that was public comments, but we can go ahead and dive into your topic, President Islas.
Well, it does relate to homelessness on our campus, and in particular, what we've seen as escalating presence there. So I just do want to call attention to the need to address the situation. We are having numerous repairs that need to be done because of encroachment on our campuses. We've had, AC equipment stolen that renders it not operational at the most inconvenient times when our students do need to be in classrooms. So I would just say that there is an intensity to look at how we're intervening in particular to keep homeless individuals off of our campuses. And obviously it relates back to the importance of establishing housing and shelter and other resources within the city. So I just did want to call attention to that issue.
Thank you, President Islas. Thank you. We are at 8:01. Are there any further member comments or questions for the good of the order before we move on to the final portion, which is going to be public comment?
I just wanted to give some closing comments, Chair, on what I've heard today. It looks like we have an opportunity to do some curbs and crosswalk improvements with the administration and school districts before next school year opening. Also, there's clearly some opportunity for us to do some better traffic control as we restaff our police department. And as a city, it looks like we're open to contracting with school districts for that traffic control if they want to go in that direction. We will be getting hopefully a GIS map of all the current sites and future sites. And then lastly, it looks like there's huge opportunity for us to partner up with after-school and recreational programs to help our kids catch up and stay out of trouble all year round, especially in summertime. And I would simply just invite my colleagues here. I know you guys are all making the big bucks for working here this late. But also, as you can see, we have several department heads in the city here with us. And I would invite you guys to invite your respective superintendents who are also equally highly compensated as our staff is to join us at the next meeting. So they too can have a stake at this collaborative partnership going forward. I know as trustees and council members, we don't have all the information at times, and that's the role of our CEOs. So I would love to see the day where our respective superintendents are also in the room and can do the follow-up on anything that we find consensus on with our respective staff, so that it's not only City of Fresno folks pulling in the overtime weight. Thank you all for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Arias. And per the School Liaison Act, it is only the board members and the council members that are technically members, but we did extend and invite to the executives to join us in the audience to listen in and participate in public comments or in the discussion as city staff did. So I think in the future we will pull some more of them in. President Islas, I see your hand is up. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I did want to just underscore, obviously I wasn't here present during the conversation about the infrastructure needs. I think those things that I heard Councilman Arias speak to are definitely issues that I would second and underscore in importance. The infrastructure around a lot of our schools is deficient. I think that there are things that we as a district are trying to do to better support safe routes to school, but the truth is a lot of the infrastructure needs, from bike lanes to crosswalks to sidewalks, would go a long way to making our parents more comfortable with allowing their children to walk or bike. And I think one of the issues that we really just need to better document and create a baseline are around injuries and fatalities that happen around our schools. We have a number of very high risk, what I would call high risk intersections, where we have had a lot of reports of near hits. And I think we do need to create a priority of where those schools are to help drive those investments. And I would also just say that I invite you to also partner with us in calling for those infrastructure needs in areas that are actually county islands, because we do have a number of schools that are in county islands, and it has really been a struggle to get attention from our Board of Supervisors on investments that are needed in relation to those schools as well. So I appreciate that the conversation happened, and I'm glad that the points that came forward are the points that we need to see addressed, and I look forward to continuing to work on this as a collective.
Thank you, President Islas. Any further member comments? Okay, let's move on to the last portion of the meeting, which is going to be public comment, effectively unscheduled communication. I do have one card here. If you're in the chamber and would like to speak, please fill out a yellow card and bring it up to our clerk here, and I'll make sure I get the card. And if you're on Zoom, just feel free to raise your hand, and we'll make sure you have the opportunity to speak. So first card I have is Joe Martinez. Come on down, Joe. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, good evening, board members. My name is Joe Martinez, and today I'm here representing an organization called Save Our Sanctuary, SOS. And tonight you heard from Fresno EOC talk about its new homeless services programs aimed at serving homeless youth or young adult population 18 to 24. And I'm happy for them. I'm happy to hear that these services are in place and that they're growing and expanding. But I'm also sad at the same time to hear that the only youth shelter serving our runaway homeless youth populations, 17 and younger, has closed. You all heard that the youth shelter closed its doors after 30 years. Ironically enough, the EOC chose November the 1st, which coincides with National Homeless Youth Awareness Prevention Month. As you all know, that the youth shelter was the main resource for our youth population throughout the city of Fresno. In fact, 80% of the youth that used the youth shelter resided within the city of Fresno. So that means there is no shelter as we are here today to serve this highly vulnerable, high-risk student youth population. The school district was also a big referral source to the youth shelter. Many of the school districts that are represented here today would refer youth to the youth shelter, and many of these kids weren't necessarily runaway or homeless kids, but just kids in crises, kids who were having problems at home, kids who were struggling in school, kids who just needed a temporary safe place to go to until they can work their problems out. Now that the youth shelter has closed its doors, there is no referral source for Sanger Unified, Central Unified, Fresno Unified, and all the school districts and Fresno County Office of Education. What EOC didn't mention in their presentation is that there is no replacement plan for this youth population. Last year in the city of Fresno, 3,361 children were reported missing, according to the Fresno Police Department. Fresno County CPS says that there are 1,900 children in the CPS system. 300 children exit the foster care system every year. Many of these young people end up on the streets because there is no safety net in place for these young people. And sadly, they end up on the streets as the adult homeless population. Fresno Unified reports 2,300 homeless students who attend school every day. Many of these kids are living in motels and other places that are not safe, stable, or healthy. Last year, 114 cases of human trafficking were identified, including 25 cases involving children. Not to mention that 1 out of 4 kids on the street today get kicked out for coming out. Our organization made 5 recommendations to Fresno EOC, and one of those options is what you guys were talking about today, and that's having others take the lead and exploring other options as a way to offer shelter and supportive services for our young people. We owe it to these students. These students are already struggling enough, and sometimes home isn't a safe place, or sometimes the school is the only safe place. But what happens when these kids go home? What happens on the weekends or when schools are out, or summer is around the corner. These kids are on winter break, and they're facing homelessness on the streets. Tonight, 300 of our homeless kids will be on the streets of Fresno because the youth shelter has closed its doors, and there is no safe place. So I'm urging this board, this is my third appeal now to a leadership board, that we need to take action. Now is not the time to be closing resources. Now is not the time to be putting the homeless out on the streets when it's 37 degrees tonight. So anyway, I just wanted to encourage this board to pursue figuring out how can we provide a safe place for our kids and making sure our vulnerable youth population are represented in the city's approach to end homelessness in our city. And we have got to make sure that this homeless population is
Joe,
included
we're about a
in our
minute over, Joe.
services.
But thank you.
Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Are any other folks on Zoom? I don't have any other yellow cards here in the chamber. Anyone on Zoom? I don't see any of our audience members with their hands up. Thank you, Joe, for being our public speaker tonight. Any last comments for the good of the order? Seeing none. Again, thank you to all the city staff, our trustees who joined us. And again, this was our first reconvening of this committee in roughly 3 years or so. So we'll try and make this a more regular occurrence and maybe tackle some of these issues sort of bite by bite. I think we kind of try to drink out of the water hose tonight with all the different kind of backup of the issues. So again, thank you all for your participation. I think we have some offline following up to do with some of the respective issues as well. But thank you all, and good night.